Storm shadows to Ukraine. Britain sends the long-range missiles Kyiv's been calling for. The UK is the first Western country to supply the weapons capable of striking deep behind Russian enemy lines.
The donation of these weapon systems gives Ukraine the best chance to defend themselves against Russia's continued brutality.
Putin has already warned such a supply would require a military response, but the announcement came as the US made an extraordinary claim about who's been supplying arms to Russia. Did South Africa load a cargo ship with ammunition bound for Russia? Rohit has exclusive details and reaction, also tonight. Interest rates hiked for the 12th time in a row as families feel the squeeze again. Joel's with the Chancellor in Japan.
This is a fake story, made-up story.
Really? Sorting truth from fiction in Trump's latest tirade on US TV. And
ferry cross the Mersey.
The ferry cross the Mersey. Is that it?
How Nina schooled Eurovision star Sam Ryder ahead of Liverpool's big night.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. After President Zelensky's continued appeals for more arms, the UK announced today it's supplying Ukraine with long-range missiles, the first Western country to do so. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace told MPs that Russia's continued and escalating aggression demanded a calibrated response. That response, UK cruise missiles for Kyiv known as Storm Shadows. We don't know how many. We do know some have already arrived. And aside from that announcement, a startling claim from the US about arms supplies to Russia claims that South Africa, a Commonwealth country, of course, and supposedly neutral on this conflict, has been covertly supplying Russia with munitions. More from Rohit on that in just a moment. First, from Dnipro, John Ray on Britain's latest donations to Ukraine.
Many of the weapons Ukraine needs to defeat Russia's invasion have been slow to arrive. 15 months into the war, the Storm Shadow cruise missile, with a range of 150 miles, will allow their pilots to punch much deeper into occupied territory. Some are already in Ukraine, after guarantees to the Defence Secretary that the system won't be used to attack Russia itself.
The donation of these weapon systems gives Ukraine the best chance to defend themselves against Russia's continued brutality, especially the deliberate targeting of Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, which is against international law.
Earlier this year, the UK led the way in supplying modern battle tanks. Around a dozen Challengers now fly the Ukrainian flag, a move which prompted Germany to promise a much larger force of Leopard tanks, but not yet sufficient weaponry, it seems, for Ukraine to go ahead with its long-planned spring offensive.
Morally, we are ready. From the point of view of motivation, our military is ready. From the point of view of staffing brigades, we are ready. From the point of view of equipment, not everything has arrived yet.
The new missiles will make Russian positions and supply lines as far away as occupied Crimea vulnerable to attack.
It allows the Ukrainians to strike high-value targets deeper within occupied territory, things like ammunition depots, as well as hardened command posts, and try to essentially paralyze a Russian response to an eventual Ukrainian counteroffensive or starve it of resources.
No wonder the Kremlin reacted with anger, warning the British move will demand a response from its military.
Ukraine is gathering as much force as it can ahead of its much anticipated counter-offensive, because this might be the best chance it has to inflict a really big defeat on the Russians. And if it fails and Western support for the war begins to fall away, it might also be its last chance. John Ray, News at 10, Eastern Ukraine.
Well, news of arms bound from Britain coincides with revelations about Russian supplies. In an extraordinary accusation from the US ambassador to South Africa today, the country is said to be providing weapons and ammunition to Moscow. It's claimed a cargo ship was loaded with equipment while it was docked near Cape Town last December. Yet, according to our analysis, you might never have known it had been there because its tracking device had been switched off.
This is the Lady R. 7,000 tonnes, 120 metres long, photographed apparently with a naval escort close to South Africa. But this is a Russian ship, sanctioned by the US. Was it used to take ammunition and weapons from South Africa to Russia? Side by side by side, the South African military on joint exercises with Russia and China in February. It says it's neutral in the war in Ukraine, but what we've confirmed this evening suggests it is more than a bystander.
We are confident that weapons were loaded onto that vessel, and I would bet my life on the accuracy of that assertion.
Tonight, the Lady R is off Egypt and on its way to China. But we've been tracking its route since September. It left Russia back then, travelling through the Black Sea, docking in Togo, which took delivery of attack helicopters it bought from Russia around the same time. Then south to Cape Town, dropping anchor on the 5th of December on a sandbank off the coast. At this point, the transponder, the device which transmits the ship's location, was switched off. ITV News analysis reveals it wasn't switched on again until 4 days later. But during that time, it was spotted in a naval harbour at Simonstown, where it had secretly docked. It's here that it's alleged that the weapons were transferred to the ship. The South African president was received by the King last November, the first state visitor of his reign.
South Africa, like the Commonwealth, has always been a part of my life.
But ITV News understands that during the visit, this matter was raised by officials.
The president.
Today, Cyril Ramaphosa said there will be an inquiry.
The matter is being looked into, and in time, we'll be able to speak about it.
Some foreign officials believe South Africa's story is implausible and that it is a secret and silent supporter of Russia's war in Ukraine.
And it seems like there's this ideological friendship and allegiance with especially Russia that they are prepared to protect and support at all costs.
The secret of the Lady R is now being revealed. But with it comes a simple truth with an impact on the battlefield. In its war against Ukraine, Russia is not alone.
And Rohit is here to take us through more of this absolutely fascinating story, Rohit. What does it tell us about Russia and the deals it's doing to try to win this war?
Well, there's one really important point that this story should remind us of, which is the fact that the world is not with Ukraine. This is one of the great myths in terms of this conflict. In fact, billions of people live in countries that are not with Ukraine or are certainly non-aligned. And there's a particular story in South Africa. Part of it is historic. There is a kind of, as the opposition figure said there, ideological alignment, a sort of sense of almost deference in some parts of the political class towards Moscow, in part for Soviet support during the apartheid years. And there's a broader story across Africa as well. Russia has put a great deal of focus into Africa, as has China. And there is a sense in some capitals, actually, that they have been ignored or almost sneered at by the Americans and some other Western allies. But, we can look broader. This entire fleet, actually, this ship, the Lady R, is part of a fleet which has been sanctioned across the board. One of the vessels we know sent munitions to India. So, this is a complicated story in terms of who supports who. And we will now see the consequences on the battlefield as we enter what will almost certainly be an incredibly bloody summer in Ukraine.
Difficult times ahead. Rohit, fascinating detail. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us all of that. Thank you. Now for the limited good news, the Bank of England was keen to spell out today no recession, a better outlook on growth and improved unemployment forecasts. There was just one announcement that really mattered, of course, for millions of borrowers. For the 12th time in a row, interest rates are going up again. Base rates will rise to 4.5%, a 15-year high, as the bank attempts to turn the dial yet again against inflation.
A record-breaking 12 rises over 18 months now leaves the Bank of England's rate at 4.5%. Natalie Taylor's fixed-rate mortgage ends within weeks, so she faces a £6,000 a year rise in payments.
It's a big impact. It means that we're going to need to make some lifestyle changes, which we were anticipating anyway, but we weren't anticipating it'd be this much per month difference.
1.4 million households on variable rate mortgages face an average annual increase of £240 based on today's rise alone. But over the last 18 months, it's a combined rise of just over £3,000 in extra payments. And 1.3 million ending mortgage fixes can expect an average rise of £2,400 a year. Higher interest rates are designed to tackle inflation, but grocery bills are still higher than bank officials expected, despite some evidence of reducing production costs. The bank's governor told us he's questioning suppliers.
I do challenge the food producers and the food retailers on this.
Is there nothing that you feel at liberty to say now to give them a nudge towards speeding up that process and passing on the price cuts?
Well, it's important that these effects work their way through and that they're dealt with, and they're dealt with as quickly as possible.
What do you say to all those people watching now and groaning in dismay? Yet another rate rise, already people struggling to pay their bills.
I firmly believe that we're going to see inflation come down this year and come down markedly this year. And of course, the most important thing is we will go on implementing policies to deliver low inflation, because that is the best thing for people in this country.
Shoppers struggling with prices at this market today. Inflation is now just over 10% and predicted to be 5% by the year's end. Savers should be helped by boosted interest rates, but increases are being only slowly passed on.
It'd be nice to see savers actually getting the interest back on the money. But I do think the government needs to put a little bit more pressure on the banks to pass that rate of interest back to the savers.
Struggling mortgage payers are reassured that a reduction in energy and food prices can be seen in today's Bank of England forecasts. But millions will only find that meaningful when they see savings in their pockets. Chris Choi, News at 10.
And we can cross now to Joel, who's in Niigata in Japan tonight, where the Chancellor's been meeting other G7 finance ministers. Joel, you know, the government has set so much store in its promise to halve inflation. These are really nerve-wracking times when so much is actually out of their control.
Absolutely right. That pledge, Julie, was made back in January when the headline rate of inflation stood at 10.1%. At the time, it felt like the safest of bets. Now, it definitely isn't. You heard the Governor of the Bank of England tell Chris there that he firmly believes that inflation will come down markedly, he says, this year. But he also thinks it will fall far more slowly than he was previously predicting. And even the Chancellor concedes there are no guarantees.
The Bank of England is predicting that we will hit the inflation target, but there's never been anything automatic about hitting it. That's why it's so important, if we're going to bring certainty back to family finances, stop prices rising, that we stick to our plan to halve it.
And encouraging news from the bank today is it doesn't think there is going to be a recession, that unemployment will remain pretty low. The full force that we've seen of energy price rises, that painful impact, is starting to subside, and there are even glimmers, reasons to be hopeful that food price inflation has now, or is now, finally peaking. The problem, and the reason the bank is rising interest rates, Julie, is that it sees signs that inflation is starting to feed itself domestically in the United Kingdom, that companies are raising their prices to protect their profits, but also to award higher pay rises to their staff, who are understandably in the circumstances, asking for them. It's impossible to know with any certainty how high interest rates will need to rise before inflation is tamed. For what it's worth, the markets are betting on another interest rate rise at some point in the months to come. As for the Chancellor, he's meeting the other G7 finance ministers later on today. He's in a rather awkward position because the UK has not only the lowest economic growth rate of the G7 countries, it also has the highest rate of inflation.
OK, Joel, thank you very much indeed for that. The Supreme Court in Pakistan has ordered the release of Imran Khan after a wave of protests followed his dramatic arrest. The former Prime Minister was seized by paramilitary forces on Tuesday on supposed corruption charges, but judges today ruled that detention was illegal. It ordered him to be kept in a safe location elsewhere in Islamabad, ahead of a planned High Court appearance tomorrow. The rail operator responsible for more train cancellations than any other was itself cancelled today. Transpennine Express's contract will not be renewed, meaning its services will be taken under government control at the end of this month. But there is an admission that even then the miserable passenger experience will not instantaneously improve.
Call 13B will be the Transpennine Express service to Huddersfield.
It's the announcement that passengers across the north have quite literally been waiting for. From the evening rush at Manchester Piccadilly to the ticket gates in Hull, Britain's worst train operator for cancellations is now having its contract cancelled. Among weary passengers in Leeds, there was both relief and understandable scepticism.
I think it'd be a good thing if it makes it better, because 3 of my 4 trains every hour are Transpennine and it gets delayed or cancelled every day.
I'm constantly stressed about whether I'm going to get home or, whether I'm going to get on another service.
How much confidence do you have that the government effectively are going to be able to run it better?
Don't ask me. Seriously.
First Transpennine's network covers a huge area across northern England and into Scotland, but it has regularly been the least reliable operator. In February, 1 in every 4 trains was cancelled. In March, it improved only slightly to 1 in 6. It becomes the 4th rail franchise in England to be put under government control, along with Northern, LNER and South Eastern. The company's blamed staff sickness, a training backlog, a dispute with the drivers' union about overtime for its problems. This train is a good example. It's sitting here running more than 25 minutes late because it doesn't have a driver. That industrial dispute in particular won't be easy or quick to resolve, but West Yorkshire's elected mayor, whose Labour Party wants to renationalise the whole network, believes things will improve.
We've seen with Northern, that was in a similar situation to Transpennine only a year or so ago, that has definitely improved. It's not perfect, but it's improved, and I hope to see that with Transpennine.
Bringing this franchise under government control means around a quarter of all UK rail journeys will now be on nationalised services. Ministers warned passengers it's not a silver bullet to make their trains run on time, but they'll know who to blame if they don't. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Leeds.
A 5-month investigation has ended with 2 Metropolitan Police officers being sacked after they were found to have punched and kicked a teenage boy during his arrest. Constables Alexei Zaleski and Connor Ryan were seen on police body cams striking the 14-year-old. The watchdog also found evidence that they had lied in their statements immediately afterwards. Both have now been dismissed without notice. The long wait for surgery, so familiar to those suffering in pain, goes on yet longer tonight. The latest figures out today show a record 7.3 million people in England waiting to start treatment. And the data also reveals a major government target has been missed. More than 10,000 patients have been forced to wait more than 18 months to be seen, a figure ministers had promised to bring down to 0.
It has been a long wait for Jessica Murdoch to get the surgery she needs to relieve her from the pain she's currently in. 3 years and counting, all while she struggles with stage 4 endometriosis. She's been told to wait until she gets a letter in the post.
I've felt suicidal, that there's no end in sight. It's constant pain, it's a constant circle.
The latest figures show that Jessica is far from alone. A record 7.3 million people were waiting to start treatment at the end of March, up from 7.2 million in February. The stats also show the government has missed a key target of eliminating 18-month waits for operations, which comes after months of strikes where around 500,000 appointments have been postponed. Cannock Chase Hospital in Staffordshire is a surgical hub that's trying to work through the backlog, dealing with around 400 procedures a month. There are 7 theatres here that work around the clock to ensure routine operations are done. But during the most recent junior doctor strikes, they fell silent because staff were diverted onto emergency care. And that has led to knock-on effects on waiting times.
And that's massively frustrating for patients who've been waiting for those.
Senior figures at the hospital are warning it could take months to get back on track.
Industrial action has been unprecedented, certainly in my working lifetime within the NHS. You know, working at the capacity that we do is very difficult to then fit those patients in at additional times because we've already got future appointments booked.
But there was some positive news. Ambulance response times have improved and the NHS has delivered a record number of diagnostic tests and checks. And although the 18-month elimination target was missed, it has come down dramatically. But with disputes ongoing between the government and unions, more strikes could be on the horizon, which will be a huge concern for those like John Carroll, who's had the surgery that he needs on his foot postponed because of walkouts.
I feel quite angry about it, that you can just be disregarded. I'll probably lose my toes. But how I'd lose them, God only knows, because who's going to take them off?
It has been a tough time for the NHS, but until the looming prospect of strikes are dealt with, it could be a while before things get substantially better. Shihab Khan, News at 10, Staffordshire.
The actor Stephen Tomlinson has been cleared of inflicting grievous bodily harm on a man who'd been drunkenly making noise outside his house. Tomlinson, who starred in the ITV drama DCI Bank, said he'd acted only in self-defence. Jurors at Newcastle Crown Court took just 2 hours to acquit him. There was an explosive outburst at the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, from the Common Speaker in Parliament earlier.
I am not going to be spoken to by a Secretary of State who is absolutely not accepting my ruling. Take it with good grace.
It came after Ms Badenoch told Sir Lindsay Hoyle that she was sorry that announcing policy changes in the media before speaking in the Commons was not up to his satisfaction. Sir Lindsay said the way she spoke to him was totally not acceptable. She apologised. Now, it has been barely 2 days since Donald Trump was found liable for the sexual assault of E. Jean Carroll. That he refused to accept that verdict was underlined tonight as he began proceedings to formally appeal it, but not before first making an appearance on US television so swaggering it put many of his previous displays, if possible, into the shade. Facing a largely sympathetic audience, he suggested he'd never even heard of his accuser. A broadcast that became such a torrent of misinformation, CNN is now being panned just for screening it.
Thank you, Fred.
There was a reason that at the end Donald Trump regarded this as a triumph.
I like you guys.
For over 70 minutes in a primetime slot, on the very network he loves to hate, Donald Trump spread an extraordinary number of his favourite falsehoods and conspiracy theories. The pro-Trump audience lapped it up. This for a man who had just been found liable for sexual assault by a New York jury. To audience laughter, he mocked and belittled his accuser in the case.
What kind of a woman meets somebody and brings them up, and within minutes you're playing hanky-panky in a dressing room, okay?
Insisting it was all part of an establishment conspiracy.
This is a fake story, made-up story. We had a horrible Clinton-appointed judge. He was horrible.
And he repeated multiple times his false and entirely discredited claim that the 2020 election had been stolen.
And when you look at what happened during that election, unless you're a very stupid person, you see what happened. That was a rigged election, and it's a shame that we had to go through it. It's very bad for our country. All over the world, they looked at it.
He was asked about the infamous moment on January the 6th, when he appeared before a crowd just before they marched on the Capitol.
They were there proud. They were there with love in their heart.
And he then broadly hinted that if he won the presidency again, he would pardon many of the rioters.
My answer is, I am most likely, if I get in, I will most likely, I would say it will be a large portion of them.
Outlandishly, Trump claimed he would be able to instantly end the Ukraine war.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
He refused to say if he wanted Ukraine to win the war.
I want everybody to stop dying. They're dying, Russians and Ukrainians. I want them to stop dying.
There was also a final swipe at the CNN journalist.
It's very simple. You're a nasty person, I'll tell you.
President Biden immediately started fundraising online, saying, "It's simple, folks. Do you want 4 more years of that?"
That hour-long fiasco on CNN raises major questions for news organizations going forward. How do they cover a candidate who is leading in the polls, who is likely to be the Republican nominee, but who uses every opportunity and every platform to spread misinformation and conspiracy theories? Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
Now, it may not have felt like it much lately, but the weather has been remarkably good as far as the UK's energy supplies are concerned. In the first 3 months of this year, wind turbines produced a third of the country's electricity. Use of gas-fired power stations was slightly down year on year. It's the first time that wind has delivered the largest share of power to the national grid. And finally, just 1 year ago, it was Sam Ryder putting the wind into the nation's sails. The spaceman carried the country to the cusp of Eurovision success, only to be beaten, of course, by Ukraine. Well, today he wouldn't be drawn on who gets his backing for this year's contest, but the UK's flag does seem to be in safe hands if the preview performance at tonight's semi-final is anything to go by.
Let the Eurovision Song Contest second semi-final begin!
An eclectic Eurovision offering, a song about being possessed by the spirit of Edgar Allan Poe, heavy rock with an old Toyota centrepiece, and the 16-year-old contestant who's taking his English GCSE next week. Taking them all on is the UK's May Muller. She has a hard act to follow.
I think it's safe to say on behalf of the whole of the UK, we're so excited to be hosting, but especially on behalf of Ukraine and on behalf of you guys, it's a true honour, and we're going to have the best time.
Sam, you've been in Liverpool for a few days, but you haven't yet done the ferry across the Mersey.
No, this is the first time. This is a maiden voyage.
Someone who knows all about the pressure facing the contestants is last year's runner-up, Sam Ryder. What are your thoughts about who's going to win?
No, because they all deserve more. I think it's best to just wish them all the best of luck. But those people, they've got a lot of guts to get on that stage in front of, 160 million people. They don't need anything else sketching them out.
Eurovision made his career. The one-time wedding singer now getting crowds like these at last year's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Last night he played at Liverpool's famous Cavern Club.
It was wicked, and even just that, the history and the heritage there, and they've taken on the mantle and this massive responsibility of throwing the Ukraine's party.
It's interesting, isn't it, playing in the Cavern? It's such a famous place, but it's a little place, isn't it, with a little stage. You're pretty used to very big stages now, aren't you?
Well, back in the day, I was used to empty rooms.
While you are left in no doubt that this city is standing in for last year's winners, Ukraine, as hosts, the Ukrainian president, in an interview, has said he'd have liked the event to have been staged somewhere closer to his country.
I'm not well versed enough to comment. We live in an imperfect world. What you can definitely tell from the atmosphere in Liverpool and beyond is that the intention is pure and it's good, and it is Ukraine's party. We're throwing it at our house.
Ferry cross the Mersey. Do you know the words to it?
I don't. I can do Tina Turner rolling on the river, but it's not quite.
Seriously, not know the words to Ferry cross the Mersey?
I don't. I'm really sorry.
Do you want me to? Yeah. Just say ferry cross the Mersey.
Ferry cross the Mersey. Is that it? Very aware that loads of people are filming now. Me butcher this song that clearly means a lot to a lot of people here.
Thankfully, he'll be singing one of his own songs as a guest on Saturday. And we now know all the finalists who'll be joining him on that famous Eurovision stage. Nina Nana, News at 10 in Liverpool.
Only Nina Nana. What is she like? That is it for tonight. We will see you tomorrow. Good night.
ITV